We see on the left Gerhard Richter and Konrad Lueg sitting across from one another in their living room arrangement at the Burgers Furniture Store. Gerhard Richter and Palermo's plaster busts at Galerie Heiner Friedrich in Cologne on the right. In 1989, when I began to occupy myself with Gerhard Richter's work within the context of my master's thesis, supervised by Uwe Schneede in Munich, I had just seen Richter's October 18th, 1977 at the Museumhaus Estes in Krefeld. For me, the first presentation of this painting series in a private residence built by Mies van der Rohe in Krefeld proved unforgettable, impressive, and shocking. This was most likely due to the intimacy of the house itself, or perhaps it had to do with the dramaturgy resulting from the distribution of these images throughout the different rooms of the house, forming lines of sight between the rooms. There was no chance for the viewer to get away from the subject being depicted, seemingly distant and cold. The viewer was confronted with a story, a history that was part of his or her own. The paintings presented the death of the spokesperson of the Red Army faction as a fatal entrapment. The Van der Rohe villa's large windows played an important dramaturgical role. The view outside into nature gave the concrete subject of these images a far-reaching, more general sense of meaning. Back then, the predominant critical opinion concerning Richter's work was that his paintings self-reflexively commented on the medium itself, and that these motives were random. Indeed, as often, Richter himself had suggested this particular reading already in 1964. He said, "I don't subscribe to any intention, system, or direction. I have no agenda, style, or cause. I don't care about technical problems, subject matter, or mastery through variation." With the RAF cycle, however, the interpretative position became absurd. A discussion on the possibilities and impossibilities of new historical painting began. In terms of Richter's October paintings, where for the first time the artist tackled historical and political themes, it was stated time and again that this was a rupture. Clearly, these paintings leave no room for doubt that form, content, and representation are interconnected, that this has its artistic motivations. In the 80s, when the October paintings were created, Martin Kippenberger and Albert Oehlen were the trailblazers of a new German painting. They considered Richter's work stuffy, petit bourgeois, and renowned as they were for provocation, they were clear to announce this openly. Richter's work did have, however, its reactionary as well as its progressive aspects. Both qualities belong to a characteristic visual language that Richter developed in the period right after his departure from the former German Democratic Republic. Having worked on the development of Richter's work during his first years in West Germany, I have been primarily interested in the question of whether history and politics already back then played a role in his practice. This artist, who from 1951 to 1956 was educated according to the strict requirements of socialist realism at the Art Academy in Dresden, receiving his commissions in the following years only due to this training, how did he experience the situation in West Germany? The Federal Republic, appearing to him from the perspective of the GDR as liberal and self-determined, was in reality dependent on the United States and sought its new identity in a clear and proper orientation towards the West. Richter's relocation from east to west shortly before the construction of the wall marked, spatially as well as temporally, a moment in the life of the artist that propelled him towards an incessant comparison between East and West, past and present, the gaze of the self and that of the other. Living with Pop, A Demonstration for Capitalist Realism is the title of a collective action by Konrad, Lueg, and Gerhard Richter that took place on October 11th, 1963, in a furniture store in Düsseldorf. You see here a photograph by Rainer Rutenbeck, shown so often that in the meantime it has come to stand in place of the actual event itself. This action, as well as a spatial installation that Richter realized together with Palermo in 1971 at Galerie Heiner Friedrich in Cologne, will be my main topic today. How did Richter encounter Konrad, Lueg, and Palermo, and what did those encounters tell us about his work and his artistic self-understanding? Richter and Lueg's collective action took place on a Friday evening in the Berges furniture store in Düsseldorf. What considered as its clientele a wide-ranging petit bourgeois public. One of the office spaces was available for the artists in which, according to their own reports, they arranged a living room in function. They transformed the antechamber with its elevator into a waiting room with 39 chairs, upon which was laid that day's edition of the Frankfurter Allgemeine newspaper. They mounted deer antlers on the walls. Next to the elevator door stood a life-size papier-mâché figure of the well-known Düsseldorf gallerist Alfred Schmäler, who reached out with his hand in a gesture of welcome to the guests. Loudspeaker announcement called the guests waiting in the antechamber into the exhibition space. I warmly welcome all newly arrived guests and kindly request those individuals with numbers 18 to 24 to proceed to exhibition room number 1. In the middle of the room, a green and a red armchair along with a couch, upon which a carefully folded kilt and fringed pillow were laid, formed a seating arrangement around a table set for coffee. A television cabinet and a standing lamp stood in the corner of the room. In between the seats, across from a small cupboard and a service trolley topped with a copy of Winston Churchill's autobiography, the lifestyle magazine Schöner Wohnen, and a vase with flowers, Joseph Beuys, upon invitation by the artist, had hung up his typical felt clothing on the coat rack directly next to the room's entrance, setting up a cardboard box with fat underneath. Brown crosses were scattered above the hanging cloth and the fat. Each piece of furniture was mounted on wide pedestals of varying elevation and spaced apart from one another with an unusual distance. On one of the armchairs sat Konrad Lueg, and across from him on the couch, Gerhard Richter. With the dark suits and ties, the two appeared as strange, alien bodies in this environment. Almost 8 years later, Richter exhibited from April 21st to May 15th, 1971, at Heiner Friedrich in Cologne, a space that was set up together with Palermo. Palermo had painted the walls all around in ochre, although he had left a white stripe as wide as an open hand to frame the walls and windows. Gerhard Richter had produced plaster cards of his and Palermo's heads, which he had then installed on tall, slim pedestals and placed in the center of the room, each facing one another. Through this arrangement, both artists were referencing classicism in Munich. While Palermo appropriated the Munich ochre of Maximilianstraße, Richter pursued the display of heads and busts from antiquity in Munich's Glypothek, built in 1830. Palermo's wall painting focused attention on the interior of the space and onto Richter's sculptures, which had been completely coated in gray paint. Indeed, Richter's cast heads, with eyes closed, had the effect of funerary masks. Apparently, it seemed that Richter wanted to construct an artistic memorial to his encounter with Palermo. Peculiar in this scene is the rigidity of the adversaries confronting each other. They are affixed in a singular position, a sole perspective. In the 8 years between the furniture store action and this installation, much had changed in the Federal Republic of Germany. Richter and Lueg's action at the furniture store in Düsseldorf in 1963 went hand in hand with a particularly cutting political event that visitors of the time would most likely not have been able to ignore, namely departing from the artist's inclusion of the television and newspaper as references to news media. On October 11th, Konrad Adenauer delivered his formal resignation to the federal president Heinrich Lübke. The following days saw activities and events in honor of the departing federal chancellor take center stage in media coverage. The very evening of the Burger's furniture store action, the ARD television station broadcasted its nightly news program at 8 p.m. with a report at 8:15 on the Adenauer era. Laid out in the waiting room, that day's edition of the Frankfurter Allgemeine newspaper, wait a moment, I'm sorry. Laid out in the waiting room, that day's edition of the Frankfurter Allgemeine newspaper covered the city of Berlin's bestowal of honorary citizenship by then Mayor Willy Brandt on the departing chancellor. Konrad Lueg, addressing my question as to whether Richter and he himself had consciously planned to coordinate their action with the symbolic end of the Adenauer era, suggested that the action itself had nothing political about it, and Richter has even spoken of a nice coincidence. However, given the background information that Adenauer's date of resignation had already been determined since December 1962, talk of a coincidental confluence of these two events is not particularly believable. Richter and Lueg did not want to take a fixed and final position, and most likely had diverse motivations for organizing the action. The image of a living room arrangement that they offered at the end of the Adenauer era was humorously exaggerated, yet as such quite appropriate. Industry was at a rise, consumption followed closely behind, and with this, people had retreated back into their idyllic homes and familiar quotidian lives. Actively reprocessing the recent National Socialist past did not take place. Over the course of the 60s, the younger generation positioned themselves more and more against their parents' stagnant, blocked relationship to the history. In 1968, as student revolts began all across Europe, Rudi Dutschke had become the spokesperson of the protests in Germany, emerging from the student community that had critically aligned itself, among other concerns against the Vietnam War and the state of emergency laws in Germany. Dutschke was shot in April 11th in Berlin and so badly wounded that he was sent recover abroad. West German society found itself confronted with an upheaval. Shortly before Dutschke was shot on the 2nd and 3rd of April 1968, Gudrun Enslin, Andreas Baader, and Horst Söhnlein and Astrid Poll had committed their first nightly arson attack on 2 department stores in Frankfurt. Soon afterwards, Ulrike Meinhof joined the group and together with Baader and Enslin formed the core of the so-called Baader-Meinhof group, which from 1971 onwards named itself the Red Army faction. From 1970 to their arrest in June 1971, they perpetrated numerous armed bank robberies and bombings modeled after the communist anti-imperialist guerrilla movements in South America. It is here where we can superimpose Konrad Lueg and Gerhard Richter and the development of their work during the 60s and early 70s. These are 2 pieces by Konrad Lueg. It's Praying Hands from 1963 on the left and Coat Hangers from 1963 on the right. He showed these 2 paintings in the Burger's furniture house. The photograph of Lueg and Richter depicting the two sitting across from one another in their living room arrangement represents their mutual interest in the petit bourgeois details of everyday life and simultaneously two very individual artistic perspectives on the quotidian. The colors and striking boldness of the motifs in Konrad Lueg's painterly within the context of the increasing radicalization of the art scene in Düsseldorf over the course of the 60s. Wait a moment, there's one page. Sorry. Here. Were strongly influenced by American pop art. Konrad Fischer was strongly influenced by American pop art. In the line with this, Lueg was especially interested in themes such as football or boxing, as well as wallpaper or fabric sample collections. The action, Coffee and Cake, that he organized in 1964 at Galerie Schmäler is characteristic of his sympathizing perspective on the petit bourgeois every day in the Rhineland. At Galerie Schmäler, Lueg brought two worlds together into an art space. Criticism didn't have any role to play. Thinking back about when he met Konrad Lueg, who appeared to him as having the air of an insider, Gerhard Richter was stated remembering, he was very well informed and had this cool manner about him, much like Humphrey Bogart. Though they appeared shy and nervous during their moment on the international stage while on visit at Iliana Sonnenarm's gallery in Paris, shortly before their exhibition at the Burgess store in Düsseldorf, Lueg and Richter presented themselves as confident and cheeky. The two even presented the then owner of the Burgess furniture store with an installation view of the exhibition New Realists at Sidney Janis Gallery in New York, in order to convince him to allow the artist to exhibit there. Konrad Lueg had found the image in the Swiss art magazine Art International. The photograph of this important New York art happening from 1962 showed at its center Klaas Oldenburg's object, the stove with meat. On October 5th, this photograph was printed in the local Düsseldorf newspaper Mittag. This pompous comparison between the New York happening and their furniture store action is characteristic of the joy Konrad Lueg took from consciously over-exaggerated claims and the way in which he was able to expose the naivety of pretension of others. The furniture store owner used the photograph as advertisement for the project. The exhibition announcement text stated underneath, "The New Realists installation view, the exhibition Living with Pop at Burgess will be something like this." Within the increasing radicalization of the art scene in Düsseldorf over the course of the 60s in 1967, Lueg opened under his legal name Konrad Fischer a gallery with an exhibition by Karl André. Shortly afterwards, he ended his career as an artist. When one examines that Gerhard Richter produced produced during this time, it becomes clear that his perspective on the entire action at Burgess is a completely different one. Immediately after his relocation from East to West Germany, Richter began to work with abstraction. The images that were created during this period he destroyed later. Karl Otto Götz, under whom Richter studied at the Düsseldorf Art Academy, remembers that after Richter's first abstract experiments, he soon took up painting after photographs. From 1962 onwards, Richter used illustrations as well as photographs from family albums that he had brought with him from the GDR as models. In a painterly manner, Richter would treat the wide-ranging material identically so that West Germany magazine illustrations and East German family photos in his paintings would be seamlessly strung together. Multiple perspectives cross one another without any comment, such as, for example, Richter's Aunt Marianne, presumably a euthanasia victim, and Mr. Heide, the doctor convicted of unlawfully administering euthanasia in 1959, or Richter's uncle Rudi, who served as a soldier under the National Socialists, and Lee Harvey Oswald. JFK's alleged murderer. Richter looked onto West Germany society with a loaded perspective formed by his youth and education in East Germany. With every new painting, it seemed that he was asking what is different, where is freedom, and above all, where is freedom from ideology? In a conversation I had with him about his collective action with Lueg, Richter told me that he had never thought he would make capitalist realism. Not even there in the furniture store arrangement. He did not want his painting to be labeled as such, though he simultaneously explained that perhaps the concept was somehow appropriate for them. Through the title Living with Pop, a demonstration for capitalist realism, Richter tried to show that, analogous to socialist realism, he had experienced a capitalist realism living in West Germany at the beginning of the 60s. He was thus not referring to an artistic style, but rather to images produced by mass media, tremendously shaping the life of a wide-reaching public, so that even in a Western society, self-determination seemed to be a concept far away from any realization. The collaborative action with Konrad Lueg was one of the many artistic encounters Richter had, what he especially sought out in the time after his move to West Germany. For him, these confrontations and debates with other ways of seeing and with the strategies employed by other artists was very important in order to inform and distinguish his own artistic position. In the Berg's furniture store action, the two individual artists and their respective personalities represented a multiplicity of historical perspectives. The visitor was not forced to confront a single opinion. He or she was much more so invited to add on his or her own third perspective. Here's where the perspectival shift, a characteristic style in Richter's paintings, finds its initial shape. The fact that he shifted perspective steadily allowed for Richter to be able to avoid a single meaning, to be fixed to a solitary point of view. Through this, the visitor to the Berge store was immediately given the space and the freedom to bring in his or her own position. In Richter's work, there's no single perspective that determines the image, referring its conclusions back to one point of view. On the contrary, images are strung along together, and the gaze catches glimpses from multiple diametrically opposed directions, literally as well as in terms of content. When one observes the heavily enlarged brushstrokes or the choice palette of colors, it becomes clear that Richter's paintings are working on this level. He dissects the picture with the means and methods of painting itself, leading the image back to its surface and, just like that, taking up its illusory character once again. Concepts such as abstract or concrete are not adequate here. Richter's pictures also have no spatiality or depth or no narrative moment either. Let's take a look at a few examples. In 1962, Richter painted Table, what in his catalogue of works he has counted as number 1. The photographic model for this picture originated from the Italian architecture magazine Domus. Parallel to the surface of the picture plane and perspectively shortened, the table is placed onto the image in a way that makes it appear closer to the canvas material. A large dark background surface area in the lower section of the image and a sharply offset zone in the upper section suggest some form of spatiality. Richter has overdone the realistic motive, having gone over the image with a paintbrush or a dish towel lightly soaked in paint thinner. In a circular motion, he has smudged together the different shades of gray in the center of the canvas. Only traces of gray color remain, flowing outwards from the middle of the painting, only to dry out, flit away, get lost at the edges. The object of the center of the picture is disguised. By utilizing paint thinner, Richter unleashed a self-reflexive process of destruction within the image itself. This destruction is concretely directed against illusion and the general aspiration of images to depict reality. On the one hand, it positions itself against the doctrine of the socialist realist school, while simultaneously against the notion that abstraction is a sign of democracy and freedom, such as the Western art world would have had it. In 1965, Richter painted the image Chair in Profile, whose model was a photograph of the object Chair with Fat from 1963 by Joseph Beuys. Richter appropriated the chair without the fat onto canvas. He freed this everyday object from its materialistic, iconological charge through Joseph Beuys, demystifying it and allowing it to stand for itself. Moreover, he painted almost around the same time two additional images of chairs that were frontally depicted. Again, the primary characteristic of these paintings is their openness to multiple viewpoints, removing altogether any charged content. Frequently, Richter's use of photographs as models for his images is compared to Marcel Duchamp's ready-made principle. Richter presented his own image-based commentary to Duchamp with the painting Emma, Nude on a Staircase, which referenced, as has been often remarked, Duchamp's Nude Descending a Staircase No. 2 from 1912. While Duchamp represented the nude from a side perspective and attempted to recreate its movement, Richter chose instead a frontal view. Through this, the movement and the temporal dimension so important for Duchamp is detached from Richter's painting. Richter has communicated this moment as secured in the photograph with oil on canvas. He monumentalized this instance and conserved it for a longer period of reception, as would be common for a family photograph or a newspaper clipping. In Richter's practice, time and space are not determinate categories of the work. The viewer can refer to the image, and through this, he or she adds a spatial dimension or a perspectival position, literally as well as metaphorically, to Richter's paintings. Each image also receives a temporal level, first through its observation by viewers, as well as generally in its pedigree of reception, its life on view by a public, so to say. From 1966 on, Richter sought out new motifs and perspectives for his images. He painted city views from a bird's eye perspective, images of clouds, seascapes, and hilly landscapes, as well as color gradients and heavily enlarged brushstrokes. He took a closer look onto the painting's faces, while his motifs represent a broader look on the world. Richter's paintings clearly differ from Palermo's work. While Palermo's work is more physically open to space experience, Richter's rectangular paintings activate the visual sense as paintings traditionally did. Both come together, however, as individuals who continued painting while others around them focused on what they believed to be direct political activism. This decision meant going head-on against the status quo, ignoring, for example, Jörg Immendorf's famous command from 1966, "Stop painting," not to mention his pejorative propaganda painting on Palermo's work. This, under Palermo's work on the left-hand side, you can read an artwork in exclamation marks from Palermo. Within the context of an apparent artistic awakening and a society thrown into uproar by air attacks, Richter depicted himself and Palermo in the Cologne exhibition as altogether ossified, stiff like a bone. This sculpture expresses an artistic impotence, what is then immediately connected to the insight that an individual, namely an artist, is not able to directly and actively change things. Gerhard Richter's skepticism has its reason rooted in his formative education within the principles of socialist realism. Perhaps the installation at Heiner Friedrich is simultaneously a form of self-assertion or self-confirmation for Richter and Palermo, insisting that their attitude has its reason and that they must go on with painting. The sculptures do not show any characteristic of these two particular individuals. As artists, they are clearly as artists they are and clearly want to be unconceivable. We can then understand Richter's sculpture as a monument of two artists who have disappeared behind their work, or at least as personalities, they are not tangible within their respective works. This did not mean, however, that Richter as well as Palermo remained oblivious or undisturbed by current events around them. The ultimate task at hand is to break the power of illusion and of ideology, regardless of whatever form it may take. The explosive power of Richter's work lies in its ability to give us the largest possible space within which we can relate with our own point of view. This is a space I find deeply embedded within Richter's paintings, as became clear to me after my first charmed encounter with the October series in Krefeld. Richter's sculptures from 1971 represent the two artists' friends re-examining their respective artistic attitude and placing it into a larger historical relationality. He does not give us the opportunity to grasp them as individuals. It is indeed all about the images. Thank you.